Focus on Abilities is brought to you by Tier Memorial Hermann, redefining rehabilitation, removing barriers, re-enabling independence. In the ILRU Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Welcome to Focus on Abilities, a program about issues affecting the lives of people with disabilities. I'm Lex Frieden. I'll be your host for today's program. I direct the Independent Living Research Utilization Program at Tier Memorial Hermann, and I'm professor at the University of Texas Health Science Center at Houston. We have a very interesting program for you today. Our guest will talk about being a student, and you'll hear more in just a minute, but first I want to ask you a question that we'll answer before the end of today's program. What health law legal program in Texas is ranked highest by U.S. News and World Report? We'll have the answer before the end of today's program. Now please stay tuned for Focus on Abilities. You're watching Focus on Abilities on HTV. I'm Lex Frieden. And today we have a special program and a special guest. I want to introduce you to Cecilia Isenberg. Cecilia, welcome to Focus on Abilities.
Thanks for having me, Lex.
Now, Cecilia, you are, or have been at least, a law student at the University of Houston, correct?
Yes, I'm in my third year, almost done.
Third year in law school, and before that you obviously graduated from an undergraduate program. Where did you start, Cecilia?
I started at Caldwell College. It's in New Jersey, and I started there with my undergrad, and I also stayed on for graduate school, and then I came back home here to Houston.
So you grew up in Houston, go to high school here and
Yes,
through primary school and so on?
Yes, I went to St. Agnes Academy, which is in Houston. It's in Bel Air.
So, Cecilia, how long did you want to be a lawyer?
I think we've been working on this. I approached my parents about 8 years old saying I wanted to be a lawyer, and we traced it back to probably about Miracle on 34th Street had come out at the time, and I thought I would get to represent Santa Claus if I was going to be a lawyer. So I think
no. This is a serious program, Cecilia. You watched a television program and fell in love with the story,
yes,
and decided you wanted to be a lawyer to represent this fantastic character,
yes,
Santa Claus, right?
And it became my mission then, and I continued, and it developed as I developed, and that's kind of where I got my start, and I just pursued it from there.
And are you still looking for this client?
No, I've obviously since I've grown, that has also changed.
Okay.
Now I have my focus in the area of health law.
So you went to undergraduate school in New Jersey and then came back to the University of Houston. Did you come to the University of Houston Law School because you'd been planning to be there all along and you were able to qualify, or what brought you back to Houston?
Well, I started at the Texas Tech Law School there in Lubbock. That's where I got in as a 1L, and then I wanted to transfer here, my whole family's here, and to the health program at the University of Houston.
So, I mean, do a lot of students do that? They eventually want to be in one place, but because the qualification standards are such, or there are so many students already enrolled, they can't take any more, that you have to go someplace else and eventually transfer? I know that happens in medical school, but it happens the same in law school?
It happens occasionally in law school as well. Everyone will want to go to law school, not always get into their dream school. We'll start somewhere and then we'll transfer to where they want to specialize, whoever has that program.
So you went then from New Jersey to Texas Tech. How long were you there in Lubbock?
I was there for 1 year, for my first year.
And then able to transfer to U of H.
Yes.
Why did you want so badly to come to U of H? Is that just because your parents lived here in Houston?
Everyone is here, my whole family's here, but the program at the University of Houston Law Center for their Health and Policy Institute, that's what really brought me back, was the health and law.
And somewhere along the line you had the idea that the Health Law Policy Institute would teach you how to represent Santa Claus.
No, the health law came in as I got a little bit older. My brother was born with Down syndrome, and that has been a challenging and rewarding experience for my family, and that's what gave me that little push that I needed to really develop my skills in the health law program.
So at what point did you realize that your work in health law could be somehow related to your brother's condition?
Because it actually started before he was even born. We heard early on that he was going to be born with Down syndrome through prenatal testing. And with that, it was given the option of to continue on for my mother to continue on with the pregnancy, know that she would have a child with Down syndrome, was also given and kind of encouraged in the opposite direction to seriously think about if that's what she wanted to do, that there were other options. And that became kind of the driving force, because it took me back, why wouldn't we, want him in our lives? And
so, Cecilia, was this a conversation that your family had? Was it a decision that your mother and father had to make, or was it up to your mother to make that decision?
It was the decision my mother and father, they made together. I wasn't party to that conversation. I was too young. But I do remember the entire, situation, and I think that always stayed in the back of my mind, especially as he got older and I got older, and I continued to seriously pursue a career in law school.
So, as a youth, you were glad to have a little brother, regardless of the circumstances.
Regardless. I didn't really see any difference until I saw the way he was treated as we got, older, and he went to elementary school, and then I saw him interact with kids in the normal classes, I guess, the regular classes.
Can you give me some example when you say the way he was treated? Was he treated differently? Was he treated better, worse, or how would you describe it?
I would say differently, not always better or worse, but kids always had questions, what's wrong with him? Curiosity. I don't think kids actually were, especially at that age, were outright mean or anything like that. It was more of a curiosity that they recognized the difference between them and him. And I think that even he recognizes that sometimes. When he's with us or kids like him, he's very outgoing, very funny. When he's around, I guess what we would consider average people, he tends to be more reserved, doesn't act out as much.
So, Cecilia, judging by your youthful age or your appearance, your brother was probably in school well past the 1975 Education for All Handicapped Children's Act, which declared that schools should provide integrated education for kids with disabilities, even the most severe disabilities, and probably past the ADA, at which point that was sort of reinforced through social norms. So do you recall a time when somebody suggested that your brother might have to be in a segregated class or special school?
I don't remember when that happened. There's an 8-year age gap between the two of us, and I was in school as well. But I do know that because of his limitations, that they were going to put him in a specifically special needs program at a regular public school.
Well, that's kind of a hedge, isn't it? I mean, we say that we're supposed to have an integrated program, and yet we send people to the same building and then put them in a special classroom with teachers who may be prepared to serve that particular subset of the population. But in fact, those kids all have slightly different disabilities, and yet what defines the classroom is that they all have some kind of disability. So they are segregated in a way. The whole idea of mainstreaming is a bit of a figment under certain conditions, isn't it?
I would say so. It is quite a figment. Even though they go to the school that every other child goes to, they don't always get that interaction.
And in your brother's case, was he always in this kind of segregated classroom, or was he ever in the truly mainstream classroom?
No, he's pretty much always been in the segregated classroom. He has speech limitations, so it makes that difficult to mainstream him into I guess, the mainstream classes with the
But
children.
even so, one of the benefits of being in the same school is that the kids are on the playground at the same time, presumably. They eat lunch together, they have social relationships and so on. Has your brother, you think, benefited from those kinds of circumstances, that dynamic?
From those circumstances, yes. I would say that he has been able to interact with kids. Everyone knows him, so I know that he has. Everyone knows him. He's a popular little guy. So he's definitely benefited from those interactions.
And Cecilia, you said that people ask, what's wrong with him, what's his circumstance. Was that basically when he was a real young child, or does that continue today as he's aging?
That continues today, but it still really relates to, I think, the smaller children. They recognize that there's a difference. They don't know how to quite express that difference, and they're curious. They want to know.
But is that just because they're more innocent and they're not afraid to ask, and the older kids at this point are sort of socialized by their mothers telling them to be quiet, and therefore they have the question, but they're just not asking?
I think that might have something to do with it too. With the small ones, they're innocent. They'll ask. They're pretty blunt. The older ones, I think, with the schools having these even segregated classes or mainstream classes, they might know. They actually have a better understanding of what's going on, even though they might not know exactly what Nathan has. They know that there is a difference, and they've seen it before. So I think that that's why the older ones don't ask as much.
I mean, in some respects, you've kind of grown up with the ADA and the benefit of social education that's occurred as a result of the ADA. I recall when the ADA was passed and signed by President Bush, July 26, 1990. There were more people at the signing ceremony in the White House than any piece of legislation before that or since then. And every major network carried that live, and in fact, many international networks carried it. Now, I've always said that one of the most significant aspects of the Americans with Disabilities Act is not what's written in the law, but the fact that on a single day, perhaps during a single hour, more people in the world were exposed to the notion that people with disabilities should be considered equal parts of society. And I think that's had a profound effect. It's changed the way society looks at disability, and I hope your brother has benefited from that. Do you feel like he has?
I feel like he has, and he's continuing to do so.
So Cecilia, we've seen a lot of changes in society, and I want to talk with you more about that, and also about your own progress towards education and a degree in law that gives you the framework for practicing disability law. We'll do that in just a minute. I want to take a break, and I hope you'll stay tuned for more Focus on Abilities. Welcome back to Focus on Abilities. I'm Lex Frieden. We're here with Cecilia Isenberg. Cecilia is a student at the University of Houston Law School. Cecilia, the progress that you've made obviously has brought you through undergraduate school, through a stint in law school at Texas Tech, and now at the University of Houston Law School. You've been here for a couple of years. Do you feel like you're really learning what you wanted to learn when you went to law school?
Yes, actually, I really feel that now that I'm at the University of Houston, I'm in a program where I am learning exactly what I wanted to do.
So this program, obviously to be a lawyer, there are certain basic courses that you have to fulfill, that you have to take. And they're not all about the specialty you want to follow, correct?
Correct.
And you take those courses, but you also have the flexibility in this program of being able to focus on certain aspects of the law. Is that the way it works?
Yes. After you go through your first year of pretty much mandatory classes, then you have a little bit more freedom in the next two to choose and specialize in what interests you.
And here at U of H, you focused on what specifically?
The health law program specifically, and the classes that have most interested me and developed me into where I want to go are genetics in the law and disabilities in the law.
What really inspires you to choose a certain course as a student in law school, and it could be any school, I guess, graduate school in particular? Why do you pick certain courses? Just because you read something about it in a pop psychology magazine or a law school article, or what is it that drives you to pick a certain course out of all the myriad of possibilities?
Well, sometimes it is scheduling. A lot of people pick based on their schedule and how they want to frame that. But for me, these two classes specifically were of interest to me, given my background with my brother, the disabilities, and
the genetics
for the prenatal screening, which is my big interest.
And I guess we have good faculty in that area at Houston?
Yes, we have excellent faculty. The professor for both of those courses is Professor Jessica Roberts, and she's been my mentor through the whole program. She's an excellent professor.
So Professor Roberts encourages you to to acquire obviously basic knowledge through reading and so on, but what other kinds of exercises does one do as a graduate in a law school?
What she encourages me to do specifically was to enter into an independent study where I could research and write in the areas that interested me. In her classroom, she also has opportunities for us to write on certain topics throughout the course. And then she also brings in excellent speakers, and we get to get real one-on-one information from those people who are out there working, doing this every day.
As I recall, I had the opportunity to speak in one of Professor Roberts' classes that you were in.
Yes, you did.
Cecilia, the practical experience you have, where was that?
The practical experience, I think it kind of develops throughout the entire range of law school. It goes from the learning the legal system and then develops through the classes that you take. There's also mediation clinics and opportunities to write, internships, and there's other classes that have a practical element to them that we're all required to take.
Okay. And how many months or years, semesters have you got left before you have to take the, will the next step be taking the bar exam, or will be getting a job?
Both simultaneously.
Yeah, okay.
Next semester is my last semester. I will be looking for a job, and then in July I'll be taking the 2014 bar exam.
The bar exam seems to be a kind of scary process for a lot of students. I've heard law students talk about, and they spend an enormous amount of time studying for that exam. Must be one of the hardest tests you ever have to take. Is that because the questions are hard, because there are so many of them, or because it's just scary having to know that you really, really need to pass this exam?
I think it's a combination of all of those things. The pressure to pass the test is kind of the first obstacle. That's the driving force to study. Also, you're tested on a wide range of subjects, so you need to know, at least your basic knowledge in every single one of those, and make sure you have that down as well. I don't know how challenging the questions are. I'm sure that they are pretty difficult, but I think the whole process of studying that many subjects, making sure that you're prepared, and then that pressure to know that this is your licensing, basically, and that you need to pass.
In order to get the kind of job you want to have, you need to have that bar exam passed.
Yes, to practice law.
And Cecilia, you'll take that in 2014, and then what would you like to do? Let's assume that you finish your studies and that you pass your bar, and I think that's a fair assumption. What will you do then?
After that, I will be pursuing a career in the health law field, but my real passion is to eventually return back and be a legal scholar and be able to be a professor at the University of Houston.
So here's a question for a young student studying law. We read in the newspaper about these legal settlements from these lawsuits and so on, and how the victims sometimes win millions and millions and millions of dollars, and we also know that the lawyers who represent them get a large portion, a significant portion of that, sometimes millions and millions and millions of dollars. So I presume then that some students might be motivated to go into the kind of law that would result in those huge settlements and large dollar income. But by the same token, I think it's probably fair to say that most lawyers don't seek that kind of fame and fortune, that most of them are motivated more like you to actually serve the public, and to do so using all the knowledge they have. There is, however, a decision to make at some point about whether you want to go into legal practice with a law firm that can pay a lot of money, or work for a not-for-profit organization that obviously can't pay as much. Has this affected your thought process about what you'll do after law school?
That hasn't affected mine. I kind of understood that going in, that was the dynamic. There are some that are driven and called to that lifestyle, to be that kind of lawyer. That wasn't my particular calling. I thought that my interest and the type of law I wanted to do would be better served in a smaller firm or in a public, not-for-profit type situation. I thought that that's where I was called to do my practice.
And you mentioned that sometime you'd like to be a law faculty. That obviously involves teaching, mentoring, it involves writing and scholarship. Before you get to that point, though, in the community, do you imagine carrying cases forward, cases of class action, I think is what we used to refer to those cases that represented groups of people with disabilities and in fact led to many of the provisions that are in the ADA?
I'm sure I will. I'm sure that's where I'll start, because you have to have practical experience before you can go back and be faculty. That's probably where I'll start and get that experience. That way I can take that back and that be part of what I offer as a professor.
Well, I've had the opportunity to meet many, many lawyers who are working in disability law, and it is interesting to me that they really cross a broad range of skill bases. And you know, I've worked with lawyers from the U.S. Department of Justice who focus very strictly on the laws it's written and making sure that people respond appropriately to the laws it's written. But I've also met many, many lawyers who are helping people in the community one by one solve problems that that result from a lack of understanding, most often not on the case of the person who's got the problem, but on the case of the person who's standing in the way of the solution. And I think you have many, many opportunities before you.
I definitely think so. I think that Houston is a great place, to begin that journey, and I'm excited for what the future holds.
So Cecilia, with respect to your brother, do you imagine at some point in the future being representing your brother in a case, or you would instead prefer that your brother never had an issue that he needed representation?
I would prefer that he never had an issue that he needed representation, but I would love to be able to represent him and children like him and help fit their needs if that is a legal need that they might have.
Obviously, you're very well motivated. What would you say to people who are watching the program who have a vague interest in law and think that maybe they could be a lawyer like you?
I would encourage them to pursue that avenue. If that's something that really interests them, they need to understand that it is a big commitment. Law school is a commitment of you and your whole family and your support system, that's what you want to do. But if you have a dream, keep going for it. It will pay off in any way that you can. Cecilia,
what would you regard as your biggest challenge outstanding so far? What's ahead of you that you really have to get over?
I think the biggest one will be, the bar. That'll probably be the next biggest challenge. But after that, then the sky's the limit.
Well, I think you'll have no problem with the bar. I wish you well. I think everybody watching the program will be behind you, and I know that Nathan will be eager to celebrate with you once you've passed. So good luck with that.
Thank you.
Cecilia Isenberg, thank you for being our guest on Focus on Abilities today.
Thank you, Lex. It was a pleasure to be here.
I want to come back in a minute with more information about Focus on Abilities, and I want to thank Cecilia Isenberg one more time, so please stay tuned. You've been watching Focus on Abilities on HTV, and we appreciate you. Today we've had Cecilia Isenberg from the U of H Law School, a student there, as our guest. The question we asked was, what's the Texas program in law that is ranked highest in the nation, and it's the U of H Health Law Policy Institute. Thanks for watching. Please tune in next time for more Focus on Abilities.
Focus on Abilities is brought to you by Tier Memorial Hermann, redefining rehabilitation, removing barriers, re-enabling independence. In the ILRU Southwest ADA Center, promoting compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.